I have been enamored with the mind and worlds of Yoko Taro since I was first introduced to him and his games 5 years ago, with the brilliant Nier Automata. That game absolutely blew my mind. It made me laugh, it made me cry, and just generally left me in awe. It is without a doubt one of the best games I have ever played. Upon looking into analysis of the game, I quickly learned of Yoko Taro and his previous games. I could not get enough of this man. His weird, humorous behavior,
Nier Automata t-shirt! Nier Automata t-shirt! Nier Automata t-shirt! Nier Automata t-shirt! Square Enix!
and his thoughts on storytelling and games as a medium captivated me. I could not look away. I was interested in playing his other games for years, but after hearing about how rough they were, I put them off. Eventually, the Nier Replicant remake forced me to jump into another of his games, and I was once again blown away by how good it was.
You're going to stop talking now, and then I'm going to slowly walk over to you, cram my hand inside your goddamn bitch-ass chest, and pull out your fucking heart!
Now here I am again, having just completed Drakengard 3 for the first time, and I can't resist finally talking about Taro in one of his games. So how is Drakengard 3? Well, it's rough to say the least. The game is far from perfect, and it's extremely easy to see why it was critically panned. The combat is lackluster, the graphics are mediocre, though the pre-rendered cutscenes are stunning. The levels are boring and repetitive, the side missions are pretty terrible, the grind can be annoying, the performance on a PS3 is supposedly awful, and oh my god, that final boss. But once again, I fell in love with this game. It is definitely my least favorite of the 3 Yoko Taro games I have played, but it still has that same magic to it that makes it far more than the sum of its parts. The soundtrack, once again composed by Keiichi Okabe with vocals from Emi Evans and others, is fantastic. The dialogue is incessant and over the top, but it's often very funny. The story is absolutely nuts and takes crazy turns. It is an incredibly unique experience. The game's party, which is actually more of a harem, consists of a sadist that loves killing, an extreme masochist, an old pervert, and whatever the hell scent is. It feels more like a band of psychotic criminals than a traditional RPG party, and this is very intentional. One of the core ideas behind the original Drakengard was that the typical video game character that kills hundreds or thousands of people with no remorse could not possibly be the type of person that has a happy, peaceful ending.
その時10年前ですね、ドラコンドラグーンを作った時に、殺すってことは何だろうってことを考えて、当時の他のゲームとかいっぱい見てたんですけれど、100人敵を倒しましたみたいな、100人突破撃破みたいなことをすごい自慢げに言うんですね。でちょっと冷静に考えると、100人人を殺して自慢するっていうのはちょっと僕正直感性としておかしいなと思って、殺人鬼ですよね。 100人殺したら、その狂気の沙汰だって思ったんですね。だからドラコンドラグーンの時は主人公の軍団を、この狂気の狂った人たちの軍団にした、正しくなくて狂った間違った人たちの話にしようと思って作ったんですね。
The original Drakengard, which I have yet to play, consisted of characters of extremely questionable morality, and there are very rarely happy endings. This idea clearly carries over into Drakengard 3. Our protagonist, Zero, is a relentless killing machine with nothing on her mind besides killing her sisters, and the party members are more concerned with getting off than any noble goal like saving the world. These characters have more in common with serial killers than the average person.
She's dead! She's dead! She's dead!
The characters literally do not stop making sex jokes and playing into the stereotypes they embody every moment they can, which can definitely be off-putting and feel a little juvenile at times, but that's entirely the point. The game has this incredible confidence to it. It pulls no punches and couldn't care less how you feel about it and its characters. They aren't characters that are written to be sympathized with and liked, nor are they intended to have any redemption arc. They unapologetically are who they are. Like the Nier games, it hides crucial information until the last moment and does not care if you have any idea of what is actually going on. Half of the game is only accessible after the first time the credits roll, where it reached an extremely unsatisfying ending with no clarification of any plot details. This point is probably where a lot of reviewers put the game down and wrote their reviews. It almost feels like it's actively trying to make you dislike it, and intentionally hides its story so that only the most dedicated of players will get to understand it. It is a Yoko Taro game, through and through. Yoko Taro is a man that has said that he would prefer to have his games continue to fail, and doesn't care when players stop playing them. He uses a creative style of writing he calls backwards script writing. When he writes his games, he starts off with an emotional event, and then figures out how to get to that event to maximize its effectiveness. He writes these crucial moments first, and then creates characters in a story to build up to these moments and ensure they have impact. He also never wants to make the same game twice. He will make whatever he feels like and doesn't care in the least what anyone thinks. His goal is to break something he refers to as the invisible wall. In his fantastic Weird Games for Weird People panel at GDC in 2014, he really goes into detail on this.
In between things you can and can't do, there exists a gray and fuzzy zone where you're unsure if you can do it, the unknown territory. Certain sort of rules and standards have been set in place. Games must be played for a certain amount of hours, or gameplay needs to be fun. Rules like these. And we call this the invisible wall. The thing I'm most interested in is this gray zone. I want to see what's beyond that wall. Whatever or however you want to call it, it's the space where no one has entered yet. It doesn't have to be all positive things or emotions or experiences. It's the kind of experience that will make an adult want to pick up a game at the game store. It's the kind of emotion you get when an adult is so frustrated and throws his controller. An experience you can't really review or evaluate on Metacritic.
All of this leads to incredibly unique games that push the medium forward, but also result in people writing the games off as pretentious or poorly designed, which often leads to poor reviews and sales. His previous game, which was the original Nier, was so unsuccessful that it led to the disbandment of its developer, Kavia. But despite poor reception and sales, these games have a dedicated audience and became cult classics. And fortunately, some of these fans worked for Square Enix and Platinum Games, who would eventually give Taro the budget and a skilled developer that could fix the most common criticism of his games: the gameplay. And thus, Nier Automata was born. A game that finally introduced this series to the mainstream and introduced Taro to millions, myself included.
Start making sense, you rotten book, or you're gonna be sorry! Maybe I'll rip your pages out one by one, or maybe I'll put you in the goddamn furnace! How can someone with such a big smart brain get hypnotized like a little bitch, huh? Oh, Shadow Lord, I love you, Shadow Lord! Come over here and give Vice a big sloppy kiss, Shadow Lord! Now pull your head out of your goddamn ass and start fucking helping us!
Now it's time to go back to the initial point of this discussion, Drakengard 3. I'm going to dive into the story and spoil just about everything, so massive spoilers from here until the time on the screen now.
No, please!
Shut up! If you want to kill an intoner, you gotta really make...
The story of Drakengard 3 is grim, and Zero is every bit of an anti-hero. All we know about her at the beginning is that she is a badass, godlike being among a group of 6 known as the Intoners, and she is trying to hunt down and kill her 5 sisters. She initially claims it is out of hatred or to steal their powers, but there is clearly more to it than that. She is accompanied by a young dragon named Mikhail, who she constantly verbally abuses.
Knock it off! How many times have I told you? Don't roll around in the fucking mud!
She doesn't exactly make a great first impression. Over the course of the game, she slaughters her sisters with no remorse, and takes in their insane disciples as her own to create the game's party. She doesn't seem to particularly like any of her newfound companions, and seems to revel in the slaughter of her countless enemies. Once again, not the most upstanding character. As previously stated, the gameplay is far from perfect, but the plot had me hooked. I was laughing the whole way and desperate to see the next cutscene that would have some epic fight scene, hilarious joke, a tease of the story, or a brutal death. You reach the first ending with pretty much no clue about anyone's motivations, and at this point the game takes a fascinating turn. Unlike the Nier games where you replay large chunks of the game but with additional context, in this game there are multiple different timelines you play through. These branches get progressively stranger and continue to lead to bad endings. It's not until we reach Branch D that we have a chance to finally have the conclusion Zero is looking for, though we are still mostly in the dark until the very end. Close to the end of the game, we finally get the answers we have been waiting for. The plan is for Zero to kill all of her sisters and then finally die herself at the hands of Mikhail. It turns out that Zero was actually a corpse that was revived by the parasitic flower in her eye. It gave her power and wanted to use her to destroy the world, but she wanted nothing to do with this plan. She tried to kill herself and the flower in the process, but it wouldn't let her and created 5 clones to act as backups to ensure its plans were completed. These 5 clones are her sisters and all represent a part of her. Zero then took it upon herself to kill all of her sisters and finally kill herself to avoid the end of the world. But this wasn't a noble goal. She didn't do it out of a sense of duty or love for the world. She did it as a defiance of her fate. At the conclusion of Branch D, she was finally successful in killing all of her sisters and managing to keep herself and Mikhail alive. This was absolutely necessary because dragons are the only beings capable of destroying the flower. This transitions to by far the strangest and most infamous part of this game, the final boss. Zero transforms into the flower and Mikhail has to stop her. This boss is so unbelievably unfair and comes so far out of left field you would think it's a joke. This is a hack and slash action game with on-rail shooter sections and some boss fights where you freely control a dragon. So naturally, the final boss is a rhythm game, and it's the most ridiculously challenging rhythm game I've ever experienced. If you miss one note, you fail, and the whole segment is around 8 minutes long. During the fight, the camera is messing with you and making it almost impossible to rely on the visuals, but at the same time the song is constantly changing tempos to trip you up as well. It is really, really difficult. And then as one final troll, there's one last note on a black screen while the characters are talking. It is insane.
Hey, Zero?
Yeah?
It is without a doubt bad game design in the conventional sense. It makes zero sense for a game to have a complete shift in gameplay at the last minute to something you have never seen before and make that new challenge so unbelievably difficult that most players will simply give up. The whole thing feels like a massive troll. Yet somehow this feels like the perfect conclusion to the game. It's a callback to the finale of the original Drakengard, but ramped up to an absurd degree. I couldn't think of a better way for such a strange game to end. Drakengard 3 ignores conventional game design and writing conventions at every turn, and couldn't have possibly ended with anything normal. Your party consists of twisted people, and Zero herself is pretty much a villain. Zero's history is further explored outside of the game in novellas and manga, and I think this information would be helpful to know at this point. Zero was not born an intoner. She was a normal girl that was abused by her mother and later sold into prostitution. She finally made a friend that she would escape with, but this person was just using her, and she was betrayed. She was recaptured and brought back to the brothel that she lived at. Eventually, she decided to kill everyone and make an escape by herself. After murdering everyone in the brothel and escaping, she met a man she lived with peacefully for a time, until she contracted a deadly disease, where he tried to sell her off and abandon her once again. At this point, she snapped. From this point on, she would kill anyone in sight if she wanted something, going so far as to slaughter an entire family just to eat some food. It became second nature to her. Eventually, she was imprisoned and died of her illness in a cell. She died with nothing and no one. In a sick turn of events, she was resurrected only to be someone else's pawn in a plot to destroy the world. Her attitude throughout the game finally makes sense with this context. She is sick of everything and everyone and just wants to die, but feels too much guilt knowing that she will be the cause of the end of the world. So she devises a plan. She befriends the dragon Michael to finish her off and the flower after she kills her sisters, and embarks on one final journey. A journey to save the world in a sense, but mostly a journey for her to finally die. Her first attack on her sisters fails, and Michael is mortally wounded. He chooses to reincarnate, and is reborn as Mikhail. This is where the game begins. Zero has spent a year recovering from her wounds and raising Mikhail to become strong enough to complete their mission. During this time, she suffers from recurring nightmares of the death of her only friend. She looks down on Mikhail for being weak and immature unlike Michael, and is often frustrated with him, but she needs him to complete her quest. Over the course of the game, she genuinely grows to care for him. This can be seen when she shows genuine worry about his safety at various points, and most obviously in the other endings. So now back to the final boss. This boss is horrifying, but beautiful. somber but hopeful, and most importantly, wholly unique. It creates a final song by fusing the songs of all the intoners and fully unleashing the hatred Zero has for the world that gave her nothing and took everything away. Zero and her sisters each get a part of the battle to sing their songs before finally coming together as a whole to unleash all of her hatred. But Mikhail is still here, the only one who truly cares for her and that she cares for. He is there to stop her. He literally repels her song until she finally unleashes everything she had inside. They have one final conversation, and she is finally allowed to rest. This final boss is a nightmare, both in terms of gameplay and in context. It is brutally difficult and sadistic, but it's also beautiful. It's the conclusion to the story of a woman who had absolutely nothing in her life. She lived an absolutely miserable experience, but in the end, she wasn't truly alone. Through Mikhail, she finally gets to experience a genuine bond and is able to end her life on her own terms and finally rest in peace. I could not imagine this game ending in any other way.
Hey, Zero?
Yeah?
I had a lot of fun. With you, I mean. It was fun being with you. The killing was hard. It was really hard. But
Stop repeating things.
getting to be with you, Zero, getting to eat next to you, getting to fly around with you, getting to have you yell at me, and then getting to be friends again. It was really, really fun.
I'm glad. Mikhail,
Yeah?
it's almost time.
Okay. Good night, Zero.
As a reward for suffering through that boss, we get the absolutely incredible credit sequence with the song This Silence Is Mine. I'm not generally a person to pay attention to credits, but this song was so powerful I couldn't look away. It's so full of emotion. It's hauntingly beautiful. Coming off the high of beating the boss and having this play was an incredible moment. It's the perfect closure for the game. It's full of hopelessness, but it's also a song about triumph. It represents the pain Zero experienced and her defiance of her fate. It's a sad ending, but through her death, she was victorious. She saved the world, but more importantly, she achieved a bit of peace in her final moments.
Silence is mine.
Drakengard 3 is a flawed game. It's a game that for most of its runtime isn't all that enjoyable. The story takes a long time to really get going and has you retreading the same tiresome missions over and over, and it has a completely bullshit final boss. It may not be the most consistent or polished experience, but it's entirely unique, and it's hard not to respect it. I have been unable to stop thinking about this game ever since I finished it. In that regard, it is a true success.
I design games and write stories, but my goal is to cause an emotional stir inside the player's brain. So, the fundamental goal isn't inside the game sitting in the middle, it's the event that occurs inside the player's brain. This is the goal we must consider most important.
As for whether I would recommend this game, that really depends. If you played other Yoko Taro games and loved them, absolutely yes. If you haven't played any of them, I would recommend starting with either Nier game. And if you didn't like the Nier games, then absolutely do not play this game. Drakengard 3 is most certainly not a game for everyone, but if it's a game for you, you'll absolutely love it. I think fans of the Nier series owe it to themselves to play this game and make their own decisions on it. I ultimately loved it and will never forget this experience. I'm gonna leave this off on one final quote from Yoko Taro. If there are 100 people, I don't anticipate all 100 liking my scenario, but I write it so at least 1 or 2 of them will love and get really into that particular story.
I hope to see you again someday. But until then, I'd like to say thank you for playing.